most important aspect of David Lynch's work today, which doesn't get talked about nearly enough, is his engagement with violence, extreme existential violence. We're now at the 1-year anniversary of his passing, and in reflecting about our mourning of his loss, we are now coinciding with the mourning of the murder of Renee Good, and what that means for all of American society itself. Because the horrible violence that was done to Good was at an existential level. It wasn't a matter of her identity and where she slots in with the world around her. It's an attempt to simply eradicate her for existing. And instead of rejecting that murder and saying we are not a society that murders people in the street for simply existing, the government instead virtualized the murder of Renee Good onto all of the citizens of Minneapolis itself, and by extension, all of America. Absconding her murderer into a witness protection program doesn't give him a miserable life that we can be satisfied with, that he's not walking around free. It virtualized his act into the hands of every ICE agent and the very fabric of our society. So it's this very same violence that we have to confront today. And just for one example, the latest today, here is a person who's not being controlled by pepper spray, but being annihilated by it. Being tortured, being harmed irreparably. The person spraying them wants to destroy this person entirely. So with Lynch and his oeuvre, the question is, where are we confronting this type of violence, and what do we do in response? In the core of Lynch's work, we're getting to how we're the violent thing. We're dealing with our own act of violence that we also disavow. So that's with Blue Velvet, Wild at Heart, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive. We have confrontations with the outside figure of the superego pushing us to give over our freedom and commit these acts of violence as some sort of buffer from ourselves, basically. So there's an extant relation with violence there, this internal pressure that feels like it's coming from outside us that we're pushing against. And in each of these films, we're dealing with the fact that we're desiring beings. We engage the world through desire. That's how we see and apprehend it. So the way in which Lynch's films are a warped engagement with reality, that's how we actually engage reality itself. We don't do so from a neutral standpoint. But a slasher figure puts this desire back on us as well. You know, they're an expression of desire at its most extreme, trying to get at our inner core. So not because of who we are in the world for any, external reason. They're trying to get to our special inner stuff. And the only way to get to that is to destroy us, to destroy who you are bodily and get to this fantasy void that's within us because of the coordinates of being desired. Love works the exact same way. Love sees something in a person more than them and elevates it beyond the living person. So that's why when you love someone, the flaws, so to speak, aren't in the way. They're part of getting to this love object. That's why love isn't a calculus of reasons to love a person, reasons not to. The flaws and whatnot just provide the coordinates of the person you love. They're just a neutral fact. And so there's a violence to love as well. Why do you love me? What is it in me that you see that I don't see myself? So it's traumatic to be loved, and it's traumatic to have a slasher coming for you. In both cases, we're dealing with desire. So typically with the slasher figure, we have the final girl, who is the bare point of human existence that resists the thing that's coming after you, the desire that is trying to destroy you. And that resistance finds a breaking point through fantasy that overpowers this thing that's coming after you and undoes it. So the classic example is Ripley getting into a power loader to defeat the alien queen. You need to find that power loader, this fantasy structure, to get out of this thing that's trying to destroy you for your inner stuff. But Lynch does not deal with final girls. When people come into confrontation with these existential threats, they do unalive. So this is primarily with Twin Peaks, and especially in The Return. We have Laura Palmer resisting Bob. We have the people who fall prey to the arrival of Jude. We have the woodsmen unaliving people in that unique episode. And with Agent Cooper coming into contact with his own position, we have Laura Palmer being delivered from Bob to Jude for another existential destruction. So while Bob and Jude are expressions of cosmic evil, and one is male, one is female, this is not a sense of like a cosmic whole that we're getting to, or this, inescapability of life from the force of evil that's coming for it. The necessity of these evil slasher type figures is ontological. Our engagement with reality brings us into confrontation with the desire of the other. And the void that's necessary to make desire run its course is a part of reality itself. Reality has to have room for there to be a void for us to put our desire into it. Otherwise, we're dealing with some sort of psychotic whole version of reality, which is clearly not what our everyday life engages. Basically, a literal sense of all being one with no way of getting any perspective on this one because you're fully a part of it. Now, as I mentioned, the power loader, the fantasy is the way of breaking out of confrontation with this destructive desire of the other that's coming for your inner stuff. You have to find some fantasy to break out of that being pinpointed down, to not be destroyed. And that's what we get in Lynch's Dune. The fantasy of the Fremen clinging to the messianic figure of Paul Atreides breaks them out of this destruction that they're receiving from the Harkonnens, as well as the destructiveness of the world itself in the austere planet of Dune. So there's a mobilizing there that's very important and political. But the mobilizing with Laura Palmer and Agent Cooper undoes the figure that's coming for us, but not without saving ourselves. Because what gets targeted there is the enjoyment that drives the destructive desire that's coming for us, especially with Bob. With Jude, that destruction persists because you're not going to get out of this engagement entirely. There's no way of erasing slasher figures from our very existence because we're desiring beings. And that desire can always translate into terrible destruction. That's the fact of life. So with the resistance that we must endure ourselves as the fabric of social reality does fall apart, lawlessness is openly asserted, and these slasher figures keep coming to us, out of the blue, and we see again and again horrible depictions of slasher violence upon people just for simply existing. Confronting that necessity and the openness of that resistance is what David Lynch's work has us face. Now, with his work, it's in the midst of everyday Americana reality for the most part, and within these frameworks of our own fantasy, how there's violence inherent to our own ways of engaging reality itself. So Lynch, meditates on this fundamental necessity and how we're always open to this state of having a slasher coming after us. That engaging life is in the face of this thing coming at you with their own desire, even if that desire is in the form of love. In both cases, it's very undoing and changes the fabric of who you are and targets your inner core. It can lead to your own falling apart. So it's about finding your own way of resisting the desire that's coming at you and really seeing it for what it is. Not turning away from it, not treating it as this out there thing. The necessity of the slasher, that's what Lynch's work brings us to. And perhaps the most slasher of all is, Lynch's own artwork. This is "Someone is in my house." That's a slasher statement par excellence. The house is your inner stuff, not just the, trope of someone being in your house, but, getting to your inner core. That's the slasher. So I really recommend looking at Lynch's artwork as well. Or there's Where We've Made It Dark, which engages the zombie on the existential level of the slasher and how that changes everything about the world around us. Check it out.